Before the silent nights and the jingling bells, the end of December was a time of primal fear and desperate magic, where the only thing standing between humanity and the eternal dark was a fire built to call back the sun. Imagine standing in a snow-deep forest thousands of years ago, the cold biting at your skin while you wait for a sign that the light will return. If you are safe and warm right now, take a moment to hit the like button to join our circle around the fire. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there for you? Settle into your blankets now, let the modern world fade away, and prepare to journey back to the ancient roots of our most cherished holiday. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep. Tonight, we peel back the layers of Victorian tradition to reveal the ancient pagan heart of Christmas, beginning in the frozen lands of the North. To understand the origins of the holiday season, we must first strip away the comfort of our modern lives. We must forget the electric lights that banish the shadows with the flick of a switch. We must forget the supermarkets stocked with fresh fruit in the dead of winter. We must go back to a time when winter was not just a season, but a threat, a predator that stalked the edges of the village, waiting for the fire to die down. For the ancient peoples of Northern Europe, the winter solstice was the most critical moment of the entire year. It was a hinge upon which their very survival swung. The astronomical reality was stark. Day by day, they watched the sun grow weaker. It rose later each morning, a pale, watery disk struggling to climb above the horizon, and it sank earlier each afternoon, swallowed by the encroaching night. In the deep midwinter, the darkness seemed unstoppable. The fear was genuine and visceral. There was no guarantee that the sun would stop its retreat. What if it simply kept sinking? What if the light disappeared forever, leaving the world locked in an eternal, frozen twilight? This was the fear of the everlasting winter. The word solstice itself captures this tension. It comes from the Latin word solstitium. This translates to the sun stands still. For a few days, around December 21st or 22nd, the sun appears to halt its southward journey. It pauses in the sky, hovering at its lowest point, as if hesitating before deciding whether to return or to abandon the earth entirely. It was in this breathless pause that the ancients held their breath too. The danger was not just spiritual, it was physical. Late winter was known as the famine months. The harvest was long past. The granaries were slowly emptying. The world outside was dead, locked in ice and snow. Starvation was a ghost that sat at every table. The survival of the community depended on careful planning and rationing. It was a time of distinct contraction. The world became smaller. Life retreated from the fields and the forests into the small, smoky circle of the hearth. And yet, in the face of this scarcity, the midwinter was a time of feasting. This seems like a contradiction, but it was a necessity born of survival. As the pastures froze and the snow deepened, there was no grass to feed the livestock. Keeping a large herd alive through the winter was impossible. And so the decision was made. The animals that could not be fed were slaughtered. For a brief window in the darkest time of the year, there was an abundance of fresh meat. It was the only time of year when such a luxury was available to the common people. Alongside the meat, there was the drink. The grain harvested in the autumn had been malted and brewed. By December, the fermentation process was complete. The beer and the wine were ready. The universe had provided a surplus of meat and alcohol exactly when the nights were longest and the spirits were lowest. It was as if nature itself was demanding a feast. We see the importance of this timing etched into the landscape itself. In England, the great stones of Stonehenge still stand as silent witnesses to this ancient obsession. While many associate the monument with the summer, recent archaeology suggests its primary purpose was for the winter. The great trilithons are aligned to frame the sunset of the winter solstice. Imagine the Neolithic people gathering there 4,000 years ago. They stand in the freezing mud, wrapped in furs, their eyes fixed on the horizon. They watch as the dying sun sinks between the massive pillars of stone. It was a moment of profound theater, a way of marking the exact second when the year died, so that the new year could be born. Across the sea in Ireland, the massive tomb of Newgrange tells a similar story, but there, the focus is on the return. Above the entrance to the tomb, there is a small opening, a roof box. It is perfectly aligned to capture the sunrise of the winter solstice. For just a few minutes, the first light of the new solar year pierces the darkness of the tomb, illuminating the inner chamber. It is a beam of hope penetrating the heart of the earth. To these ancient observers, the sun was often visualized as a great wheel. In the Norse and Germanic languages, the words howl or Yule are thought to be related to this concept of a wheel turning. But a wheel does not turn on its own. It needs force. It needs momentum. This brings us to the concept of sympathetic magic. This is the ancient belief that you can influence the great forces of nature by imitating them on a small scale. If the sun is a fire that is fading, then you must light fires on earth to fuel it. You must show the sun what it means to burn. You must coax it back with heat and light. Imagine the sound of ice cracking on a frozen river in the dead of night. It is a sharp, violent retort that echoes through the valley. The air is so cold, it hurts to breathe. A sentinel stands on a ridge, watching the eastern horizon. His breath plumes before him in white clouds, freezing on his beard. The silence of the snow-covered landscape absorbs all sound, creating a heavy, muffled quiet. His fingers are stiff and clumsy as he struggles to strike a spark against flint. He is trying to light the beacon. The smell of wood smoke begins to rise, trapped low to the ground by the heavy winter air. It is a scent of safety. As the flame catches, it is a signal to the darkness. We are still here. We are still burning. As the fear of darkness grew, so did the rituals to combat it, leading to the great festival of the North. In the icy fjords and deep forests of Scandinavia, this festival was known as Jol, or as we know it today, Yule. The word itself, derived from the Old Norse Jol, conjures images of Vikings, deep snow, and roaring fires. But long before the Vikings sailed the seas, the people of the North were celebrating the turning of the year. The transition of Yule from a pagan festival to a Christian one is a story of clever adaptation. King Haakon, the Good of Norway, in the 10th century, played a pivotal role. He moved the celebration of Yule to coincide with the Christian Christmas, merging the traditions until they became almost indistinguishable. But the roots of Yule go far deeper than kings and decrees. At the center of the celebration was the Yule log. Today, we might think of a chocolate cake rolled to look like wood, or perhaps a single small log on a gas fire. But the original Yule log was a beast of a thing. It was an entire tree. It was carefully selected, brought into the longhouse with great ceremony, and fed into the hearth, slowly. It had to be large enough to burn continuously for 12 days. This was not just for warmth, it was a magical act. The fire of the Yule log was the heart of the home, a piece of the sun brought indoors. The continuity of the fire was essential. You never let the Yule fire burn out completely. A piece of the charred log was always saved. It was kept safe throughout the year, hidden away in the rafters. When the next winter came, this old, charred piece of wood was used to light the new Yule log. It was a symbol of eternal life. The light never truly died. It was simply passed from one generation of the fire to the next. The ashes of the Yule log were believed to hold powerful protection. They were scattered over the fields to bless the crops, or kept in the house to protect against lightning strikes. In a world of wooden houses and thatch roofs, fire was a constant danger. So using the ashes of the sacred fire as protection against the destructive fire of the storm made perfect sense. But Yule was not a time for quiet contemplation. It was a time of loud, boisterous, religious intoxication. Drinking Yule ale was not a vice. It was a mandatory religious act. The law stated that every household had to brew a certain amount of ale. To drink was to honor the gods. It was a way of entering a sacred state of mind, of bonding with your kin, and of warming the blood against the freezing cold. The feast was centered around the blot. This was a sacrificial ritual where the blood of the animal was sprinkled to bless the walls of the house, the livestock, and the people. It sounds gruesome to modern ears, but to the Norse, it was a consecration. It was sharing the life force of the animal to ensure the life of the community. The house itself was transformed. Evergreens were cut and brought inside, pine, spruce, and fir trees. In a landscape where every other tree had lost its leaves and stood like a skeleton against the gray sky, the evergreens were a miracle. They refused to die. They remained green and vibrant, even in the heart of winter. Bringing them indoors was a way of bringing the spirit of life into the home. It was a reminder that spring would return. And on the table, the centerpiece was often the Yule boar, or snarglter. This great beast was sacrificed and then roasted. But before it was eaten, men would lay their hands on the boar's bristles and make solemn oaths for the coming year. This was a serious business. An oath sworn on the Yule boar could not be broken. This tradition of the festive pig echoes down the centuries to the Christmas ham that sits on so many tables today. During Yule, the veil between the worlds was thin. It was a time when the living and the dead were close. The ancestors were invited to the feast, but other things might wander in as well. Imagine the roar of a massive bonfire in the center of a Viking longhouse. The flames lick at the soot-stained beams of the roof. The scent of pine needles warms up in the indoor heat, mixing with the smell of the roasting pork and the heavy, sweet aroma of the dark ale. Shadows dance wildly on the wooden walls, twisting and stretching like spirits. The hall is packed. The communal warmth of bodies packed together fights against the draft that sneaks under the door. Outside, the wind screams, but inside there is light and meat and the comfort of the clan. But the fire was not just for warmth. It was protection against the entities that roamed the winter sky. If you were to step outside that warm longhouse and look up at the storm-tossed clouds, you might see something that would freeze the blood in your veins. You might hear the baying of hounds and the thunder of hooves across the sky. This was the wild hunt. In Norse tradition, this ghostly procession was known as the Oscareia. It was a terrifying cavalcade of spirits, spectral hunters, and the souls of the dead, riding through the winter nights, and leading them was the Allfather himself, Odin. During Yule, Odin took on a different aspect. He was known as Jolnir, the Yule One, or Jolfader, the Yule Father. He did not look like the golden-haired gods of later paintings. He was an old man, a graybeard. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his missing eye, and he was wrapped in a heavy blue or gray cloak to protect him from the weather. He rode his magnificent 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, leaping across the sky, leading the hunt through the clouds. The connection between this ancient god and our modern Santa Claus is striking. Children in the Norse lands knew that Sleipnir would be hungry from his journey across the heavens. So, they would leave hay or sugar in their boots and place them by the chimney or the door. In the morning, they would find the hay gone. In its place, Odin would have left gifts, small cakes, candy, or toys. It was a reward for their kindness to his steed. This is the direct ancestor of the Christmas stocking. But unlike Santa, Odin was dangerous. Seeing the wild hunt was not a joyful event. It was an omen. It could presage war, plague, or the death of the witness. If you heard the wind howling like a pack of wolves, you stayed indoors. You hid your eyes. The addition of fear to the season was potent. The gods were generous, but they were also wild. Some historians and folklorists trace even stranger connections. They speak of the shamans of the north, and the red and white mushrooms, the Amanita muscaria, that grow beneath the pine trees. These mushrooms were used to induce visions, to travel to the spirit world. The shamans, gathering these sacraments, would dry them on the branches of the trees like ornaments. In deep snow, when the door of the yurt or hut was blocked, the shaman might enter through the smoke hole in the roof the chimney. These are echoes, whispers of a past where magic was chemical and spiritual, woven into the very fabric of the winter's survival. There were also the elves, the Alfar. These were not the tiny toy makers of the North Pole. They were powerful, luminous spirits associated with the gods and with the harvest. During Yule, they were active. They had to be appeased. They had to be respected. Imagine the howling wind sounding like baying hounds in the distance. You are a child in a dark wooden house. You hear the clatter of hooves on the thatched roof above your head. Is it just the wind, or is it Sleipnir? You peek out the window and see a lone, cloaked wanderer in the snowstorm, leaning on a staff. A wide hat obscures his face. A feeling of dread mixes with excitement in your chest. You look at your boots by the door, the texture of the dried hay stuffing them, scratching your fingers. You hope the Yule Father is pleased. While the north looked to the sky with dread and reverence, the south celebrated the solstice with chaos and inversion. But before we leave the Germanic lands, there is one more tradition we must honor, one that belongs to the women. We have spoken of hunters and warriors, of gods and kings. But the winter was also the domain of the mothers. In the Anglo-Saxon tradition, the night of December 24th, or sometimes the 25th, was known as Madronith. This translates to Mother's Night. We know of this festival thanks to the Venerable Bede, a monk writing in the 8th century. In his work De Temporum Ration, he recorded that the heathen English began their year on the 8th day before the calends of January, which is now our Christmas, and the night before they called Mother's Night. Bede does not give us all the details, likely because he was a Christian trying to distance his people from their pagan past. But we know it was a night dedicated to the female ancestral spirits. the Desier, or perhaps specific matron goddesses who watched over the tribe. It highlights the absolute centrality of women in the midwinter rituals. The feast could not happen without them. The survival of the family through the winter depended on their management of the home and the hearth. Specific sacrifices were made on this night to ensure fertility, not just of the crops, but of the people. It was a domestic magic, quieter than the wild hunt, but just as powerful. It was focused on the protection of the house, the health of the children, and the turning of the year. There is a fascinating connection here to the domestic arts, specifically spinning. In Germanic folklore, there is a goddess known as Hall or Holda. She is a figure of winter, often associated with snow. When she shakes her bed feather, it snows on earth. She is also the patron of spinning. During the 12 days of Yule, there was often a taboo on spinning wool. The wheels had to stand still. This mimicked the sun standing still. It was believed that if you spun during Yule, you might tangle the threads of fate. Imagine the rhythmic sound of a spinning wheel, a sound that has filled the house for months, suddenly slowing to a halt. The silence that follows is heavy with significance. There is the smell of baking bread, loaves specially marked with symbols for the goddesses. Women gather at a twilight altar, their voices raised in soft, low chanting. They wear heavy wool cloaks against the biting wind, the fabric scratchy and warm. The flicker of tallow candles illuminates carved wooden statues of the mothers. These are not distant gods in the sky. These are the ancestors, the guardians, the women who came before. These northern traditions set the stage, but the true blueprint for the Christmas party comes from the heart of the Roman Empire. Before we travel south to Rome, I'm curious, do you have a favorite family tradition that feels a little bit ancient or magical? Let me know in the comments what special ritual makes the season feel real to you. Now, let's leave the snowy forests of the north and enter the marble halls of Rome. We leave behind the frost-bitten forests of the north, where the silence of the snow muffled the world, and we travel south. We cross the Alps, descending into a land where the winter is not a predator, but a respite. We enter the marble heart of the ancient world. We enter Rome. If the north dealt with the darkness through solemn rituals and protective fires, Rome dealt with it through an explosion of light, noise, and organized chaos. Here, in the sprawling capital of the empire, the winter solstice was not just a celestial event. It was the signal for the greatest party in human history. It was the season of Saturnalia. To understand the sheer magnitude of this festival, we must first meet its patron. High in the Roman Forum, at the very foot of the Capitoline Hill, stood the Temple of Saturn. It was one of the oldest sacred spaces in the city, a heavy, imposing structure that housed the state treasury. But the god who lived inside was not a god of gold, at least not originally. Saturn was an ancient deity, a god of agriculture, of time, and of liberation. According to Roman mythology, long before Jupiter ruled the skies, Saturn reigned over the earth. This was known as the Golden Age. It was a time of perfect peace and unimaginable abundance. In the Golden Age, the myths told us there was no labor. The earth gave up its fruits willingly. Wheat grew without plowing. Vines were heavy with grapes without pruning. There was no war, no disease, and perhaps most importantly, there was no slavery. All living things were equal, existing in a state of perpetual springtime. But Saturn was overthrown, and the Golden Age ended, replaced by the harder, harsher world of iron and toil that the Romans knew. However, the memory of that paradise remained. and for 1 week every December, the Romans decided to bring it back. Inside his temple, the cult statue of Saturn was a peculiar sight. For most of the year, the god's feet were bound. They were wrapped tight in bonds of heavy wool. It was as if the chaotic, liberating power of the god was too dangerous to be let loose on a city that prided itself on order and discipline. He was kept in check, he was contained. But on December 17th, the mood of the city shifted. The priests, in a solemn and significant ritual, approached the statue. With great care, they untied the knots, they unwound the wool. Saturn was unbound. The moment those bonds fell away, the city of Rome underwent a transformation that is hard for us to imagine today. The cry went up from the Forum, echoing through the narrow streets, bouncing off the tenement blocks, and rising to the palaces on the Palatine Hill, Io Saturnalia. It was a shout of joy, of release, a greeting that replaced the formal avenue. It meant that the rules were gone. The festival officially began on December 17th, and while it was originally a single day, the people loved it so much that it kept expanding. It grew to 3 days, then 5, and eventually it consumed an entire week, lasting until the 23rd. It was, without a doubt, the most popular holiday in the Roman calendar. The poet Catullus, a man who knew a thing or two about enjoying life, called it simply the best of days. During this week, the machinery of the empire ground to a halt. The massive courts of law, usually buzzing with orators and legal disputes, were closed. No trials could be held. No one could be punished. The schools were shut, liberating thousands of children from their strict masters. The shops that lined the streets locked their doors. Even the army, the iron backbone of Rome, stood down. It was strictly forbidden to declare war during Saturnalia. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was absolute, enforced not by legions, but by feasting. The visual landscape of the city changed. Usually, a Roman citizen was defined by his toga. The toga was a heavy, white, woolen garment. It was majestic, but it was also uncomfortable, difficult to keep clean, and a symbol of duty and public life. During Saturnalia, the toga was cast aside. In its place, men wore the synthesis. This was a colorful, lightweight outfit, something like a silk dinner suit. It was flashy, it was comfortable, it was bright red, green, gold, and purple. Suddenly, the austere white city was awash in vibrant color. Imagine walking through the Suburra, the crowded lower-class district of Rome, on the first night of the festival. The air is cold, but the streets are hot with the press of bodies. Everywhere you look, people are wearing small felt caps called the pileus. This cap was the traditional symbol of a freed slave. During Saturnalia, everyone wore them: senators, shopkeepers, slaves, and soldiers. For a week, everyone was pretending to be liberated. The distinctions of rank, so vital to Roman society, were blurred into a sea of felt hats and colorful silks. The smell of the city is different. It is not the usual stench of the gutters. It is the smell of roasting meat, of burning pine, and above all, of spiced wine. Huge jars of wine were opened in the streets. Barriers were broken down. Strangers embraced. The noise was deafening singing, shouting, the clatter of carts, the music of flutes and lyres. It was a release of a year's worth of tension. It was the collective exhale of a civilization that worked itself to the bone. But the true heart of Saturnalia was not just in the partying. It was in the inversion. It was in the world turned upside down. This brings us to the most famous, and perhaps the most shocking, aspect of the holiday. the reversal of roles between masters and slaves. Rome was a slave society. The entire economy, the entire domestic structure, relied on the absolute submission of the enslaved to the free. But during Saturnalia, to honor the memory of that golden age where no one was a servant, the hierarchy was flipped. We must picture the scene inside a wealthy Roman domus or townhouse. In the dining room, the triclinium, the table is set with the finest silver. The couches are piled with cushions, but the people reclining on those cushions are not the masters of the house. They are the household staff, the cooks, the cleaners, the doormen, the personal attendants. They are wearing their master's clothes. They are wearing his rings. They are laughing, drinking the vintage Falernian wine usually reserved for special guests. And where is the master? He is standing by the table. He has a napkin draped over his arm. He is pouring the wine. He is bringing out the platters of roasted dormice and sow's udder. He is serving his own property. This was not a revolution. It was a ritual. It was a safety valve. The Romans believed that by allowing this temporary chaos, they reinforced the permanent order. By letting the steam out of the pot once a year, they prevented the pot from exploding. But for the people involved, it was a moment of profound humanity. Slaves were permitted to speak freely. For 360 days a year, a slave might be punished for speaking out of turn. During Saturnalia, they could roast their masters with insults. They could mock their baldness, their bad temper, their greed, and the masters had to take it. They had to laugh. There is a letter from the philosopher Seneca the Younger, describing the noise of the city. He complains, somewhat playfully, that the whole mob has let itself go in pleasures. But even he, the Stoic, admits that it is good to relax the mind, to unbend, so that we can be stronger when we return to work. Another element of this inversion was the gambling. Rome had strict laws against gambling with dice. It was considered a vice that destroyed fortunes. But during December, the laws were suspended. Everyone gambled. You would see senators throwing dice in the gutter with laborers. The click-clack of the knucklebones and the wooden dice on the tavern tables was the soundtrack of the season. To oversee this beautiful madness, each household would elect a leader. He was called the Saturnalicious Princeps, the Prince of Saturnalia. In later centuries, in the royal courts of England and France, this figure would evolve into the Lord of Misrule. The mock king was usually a lowly member of the household, often a child or a slave, chosen by the roll of the dice. Once elected, his word was law, but his laws were absurd. He might command the master of the house to sing a bawdy song. He might order a shy scholar to dance on the table. He might decree that everyone must speak in riddles or hop on one foot. His commands had to be obeyed instantly. It was a parody of power, a way of mocking the absolute authority that usually ruled their lives. Imagine the sight of a slave wearing a paper crown and a purple robe, sitting at the head of the table. He points a finger at his master, a powerful politician who commands legions. You, the mock king shouts, "Fetch me more wine, and be quick about it." And the politician, red-faced and laughing, hurries to obey. It was a theater of equality. For a few nights, the grim reality of the ancient world was suspended, and everyone, regardless of their station, was simply a human being looking for joy in the darkness. Amidst the feasting and the gambling, a quieter tradition emerged that we still practice today. As the festival reached its conclusion, the riotous energy began to soften into something more intimate. The last days of the festival, specifically December 21st and 22nd, were known as the Sigillaria. This translates roughly to the festival of the little figures. This was the time for gift-giving. The streets of Rome were lined with temporary market stalls, much like our modern Christmas markets. These stalls were piled high with gifts. The crowds would browse, haggling with merchants, looking for the perfect token for their friends and family. The most common gift, the one that gave the days their name, were the sigilla. These were small terracotta figurines. They were often made of clay, simple and inexpensive. They could represent gods, heroes, grotesque caricatures, or everyday people. For children, these were toys ancestors of the modern action figure or doll. For adults, they were symbolic. Some scholars believe they were a vestige of ancient sacrifices, a clay substitute for a life. But by the time of the Empire, they were simply tokens of affection. Imagine the texture of a small clay doll held in a child's hand. It is rough, painted in bright, primary colors. The child runs through the courtyard, clutching the prize, while the parents look on. The act of giving a toy to a child in December is a tradition with an unbroken lineage stretching back over 2,000 years. But the gifts were not limited to dolls. The poet Martial, who lived in the 1st century AD, wrote an entire book of short poems or epigrams to accompany Saturnalia gifts. These poems give us an incredible window into what Romans gave each other. The list is surprisingly familiar. There were practical gifts, warm clothing, scarves, writing tablets, toothpicks made of bone, or silver spoons. There were food gifts, jars of expensive fish sauce, boxes of dried figs, peppercorns, or sausages. There were extravagant gifts for the wealthy, exotic pets, slave boys, gold bowls, or rare books. And, just like today, there were gag gifts. The white elephant gift exchange was alive and well in ancient Rome. You might give a friend who was a terrible poet a blank book. You might give a bald man a comb. The goal was to make the recipient laugh. Employers and patrons played a role too. It was customary for a wealthy patron to give a gift or a sporula to his clients and dependents. This is the direct ancestor of the Christmas bonus. It was a way of sharing the wealth of the year, ensuring that everyone had enough to enjoy the feast. But perhaps the most significant gift, the one with the deepest meaning, was the cerae. These were wax tapers, or candles. In the ancient world, candles were a luxury. Most people used smoky olive oil lamps. A wax candle gave a clean, bright, steady flame. Giving a candle during the darkest week of the year was not just a practical gift. It was a piece of sympathetic magic, just like the Yule log in the north. It was a way of saying, "Here is the light. May it return to you." Friends would exchange these tapers, and on the final nights of Saturnalia, the houses and streets would be illuminated by thousands of flickering points of light. Imagine the soft glow of hundreds of candles illuminating a Roman courtyard. The winter wind blows through the atrium, but the flames dance and hold their ground. The scent of burning beeswax mixes with the crisp winter air. It is a smell that signals holiness and celebration. A friend hands you a small, wrapped parcel. You hear the crinkle of the papyrus wrapping. You open it to find a silver writing stylus. You smile. The connection between you is strengthened. The social bonds that hold the city together are renewed. This emphasis on generosity, on light, and on the joy of children creates a bridge. It is a bridge that spans the centuries, connecting the pagan heart of Rome to the living rooms of the modern world. But Saturn was not the only god honored in December. A powerful solar deity staked a claim on the 25th. As the Roman Empire grew older, it began to change. The old gods, like Jupiter and Mars, began to feel distant. The people craved a more personal connection to the divine. They looked to the east for new mysteries. And in the crisis of the 3rd century, when the empire nearly collapsed under the weight of invasions and civil wars, a succession of soldier emperors looked for a symbol that could unite the fractured world. They found that symbol in the sun. In the year 274 AD, the Emperor Aurelian returned to Rome after restoring the borders of the empire. He needed a god that represented victory, order, and eternity. He established the cult of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. Aurelian dedicated a massive new temple to the sun in Rome. He created a new priesthood, and, most critically for our story, he elevated the status of the sun's birthday. The logic was astronomical. The winter solstice usually fell on December 21st or 22nd. But for a few days, the movement of the sun is hard to detect with the naked eye. It isn't until a few days later, around December 25th, that it becomes visibly clear that the days are getting longer. The sun has not been defeated by the darkness. It has conquered. It is reborn. So, December 25th became the dies natalis solis, Invictitha, birthday of the unconquered sun. This was not just a state religion. It blended with another popular cult of the time, Mithraism. Mithras was a Persian god, a god of light and truth, who was incredibly popular with the Roman legions. Soldiers in the damp forts of Britain and the burning sands of Syria worshipped Mithras. He was often depicted sharing a banquet with the sun god. His followers called him the light of the world. The imagery of these solar cults is startlingly familiar. Sol Invictus was often depicted as a young man with a crown of rays beaming from his head. This radiant crown is the direct visual origin of the halo that we see in Christian art. When you see a medieval painting of a saint with a glowing circle behind their head, you are looking at the legacy of the unconquered sun. The atmosphere of this day was one of triumph. It was a celebration of the victory of life over death. Chariot races were held in honor of the sun, who drove his own fiery chariot across the sky. Imagine the blinding gleam of a golden sun disk in a temple reflecting the light of high noon. The rhythmic marching of soldiers singing hymns to Mithras echoes against the stone walls. They are celebrating the fact that the light has returned. You step out into the street, and the warmth of the morning sun hits your face after a cold night. It feels like a blessing. It feels like a promise kept. This was the world that Constantine the Great was born into. Constantine is famous as the first Christian emperor, but for much of his life, he was a devotee of Sol Invictus. His coins showed his profile on one side and the sun god on the other. Even after he converted to Christianity, the two traditions remained intertwined in his mind. It was Constantine who declared that the day of the sun, Sunday, should be the official day of rest for the empire. It was a day to honor the light. The early Christians were navigating this solar-saturated world. They were asking themselves a question. If the world celebrates the birth of the physical sun on December 25th, when should we celebrate the birth of the spiritual sun? The Bible does not say when Christ was born, but the prophet Malachi had called the Messiah the Son of Righteousness. The metaphor was waiting to be used. It was not a cynical theft of a holiday. It was a cosmic alignment. To the early Christian mind, it made perfect sense that the Savior of the world would be born on the very day that the light returns to the universe. The theological truth and the astronomical truth were seen as one and the same. The Vatican itself sits on top of this history. Beneath the glorious St. Peter's Basilica, there is an ancient necropolis. In one of the tombs, there is a mosaic of Christ, but he is not depicted as a shepherd. He is depicted as the sun god, riding a chariot, with rays of light streaming from his head. As the empire transformed, these solar celebrations did not vanish. They were absorbed, setting the stage for a new synthesis. The rowdy generosity of Saturnalia, the gift-giving of the Sigillaria, and the solemn reverence of the unconquered Sunol of these streams were flowing toward a single point. They were about to merge into the ocean of Christmas. We often feel that the holidays pass by too quickly. If you could adopt one Roman tradition, maybe the week-long holiday or the ban on business, what would it be? I'll be reading your thoughts. Now, let's see how these ancient currents merged into the river of history. The shouting of the Roman streets fades away. The roar of the bonfires in the Viking longhouses dies down to a smolder. The wild energy of the ancient world begins to settle. As we move forward in time, the chaos of the early centuries gives way to the structured, quiet contemplation of the medieval world. We leave the forum and enter the cloister. While the date was fixed, the transition was not a sudden break, but a slow, careful weaving of old threads into a new tapestry. The Church, growing in power and influence across Europe, faced a challenge. The people loved their festivals. They loved the lights, the greenery, and the feasting of Saturnalia and Yule. To simply ban them would have been impossible. It would have been like trying to stop the tide. So, the Church made a choice. They would not destroy the old ways, they would baptize them. The first step was the calendar itself. For centuries, there was no agreement on when the Nativity should be celebrated. The Bible, for all its detail, is silent on the date. In fact, clues in the text suggest it was not winter at all. The Gospel of Luke tells us that shepherds were out in the fields, watching their flocks by night. In the hill country of Judea, the winters are cold and wet. By December, the sheep would have been corralled in caves or shelters, not grazing in the open. Early Christian thinkers, like the scholar Origen in the 3rd century, actually opposed the idea of celebrating Christ's birthday at all. To them, birthday parties were a pagan custom, something the pharaohs or Herod did. Saints and martyrs were honored on the day of their death, their birth into heaven, not their birth on earth. But as the Church moved from being a persecuted minority to the official religion of the empire, it needed a festival to rival the massive celebrations of Sol Invictus and Saturnalia. If the people were going to be celebrating the return of the light anyway, the Church reasoned, let them celebrate the true light. In the 4th century, Pope Julius I is often credited with making the decisive move. He formalized December 25th as the Feast of the Nativity. The first recorded reference to this date appears in a fascinating document known as the Chronography of 354. It was a calendar for a wealthy Roman Christian, and it lists Natus Christus in Bethlehem, Judea, on December 25th. This was a masterstroke of strategy known as enculturation. It means keeping the form of a cultural tradition but changing the meaning. The sun that was being reborn was no longer the physical star in the sky, but the Son of God. The victory was not over the winter darkness, but over the darkness of sin. Imagine the scratch of a quill on parchment in a quiet monastery. A monk sits at a slanted desk, the smell of dust and old scrolls filling the air. He is copying a calendar, carefully writing the new holy days over the old ones. Outside, the world is changing. The shouts of Io Saturnalia are being replaced by the echo of Latin chants. Churches are being built, often directly upon the foundations of Roman temples, using the same stones to tell a different story. The transition was seamless. This synthesis explains the famous 12 days of Christmas. The duration of the festivities mirrors the extended celebrations of the pagan midwinter, Saturnalia, the calends of January, and you'll all stretched over a period of days, not just a single morning. The Council of Tours in the year 567 AD officially proclaimed the 12 days from Christmas to Epiphany as a sacred season. It was a way of sanctifying the entire holiday block. However, the transition was slow. In the Eastern Church, for a long time, the primary celebration was Epiphany on January 6th, marking the visit of the Magi and the baptism of Jesus. In the rural countryside, the old gods did not vanish overnight. They lingered in the shadows of the forest, waiting to be invited back in. While the date was fixed, the symbols of the season proved harder to change, as nature itself insisted on entering the home. The people of Northern Europe and the British Isles lived their lives in deep connection with the forest. When the world turned gray and brown, when the leaves fell and the trees looked like dead skeletons, the eye was naturally drawn to the few things that refused to die. The evergreens, to the ancient Druids and the Celts. These plants were not just decorations, they were miracles. They were proof that life continued even in the depths of death. To plants, in particular, held a sacred place in the midwinter lore, the holly and the ivy. Holly was a plant of protection. Its leaves are glossy, dark, and armed with sharp spines. In Roman times, holly was sacred to Saturn. It was used to decorate the images of the ancestors. But in the Celtic lands, it had a wilder association. The Druids believed that holly guarded against evil spirits and witchcraft. Because it retained its leaves, it was seen as a haven for the tiny nature spirits, the fairies and elves, who needed a place to hide from the cold. Bringing holly indoors was an act of hospitality to the unseen world. The church, seeing the people's love for these red-berried boughs, gave them a new story. The sharp thorns of the holly leaf were said to represent the crown of thorns worn by Christ. The bright red berries, which stand out so vividly against the snow, were said to represent the drops of blood. The holly became a symbol of the Passion, hidden within the joy of the birth. Then there was the ivy. Ivy is a climber. It is resilient. In the ancient world, it was associated with Bacchus, the god of wine and revelry, because it often grew in vineyards and remained green when the vines were bare. It represented vitality and the life force. In English folklore, a curious tradition emerged, a gender rivalry between the two plants. Holly, with its rigid structure and thorns, was seen as masculine. Ivy, with its soft, twisting vines that embrace whatever they touch, was seen as feminine. Medieval carols often depict a contest between the holly and the ivy, a debate over who rules the forest. It was a playful echo of the social inversions of the older festivals, a conversation between the master and the mistress of the house. The tradition of the wreath combines these elements. The wreath is a circle, the most perfect shape in nature. It has no beginning and no end. For the pagans, it represented the wheel of the year, the cycle of seasons that always returns. For the Christians, it became a symbol of God's eternal love. Hanging a wreath on the door was, and is a sign of victory. It says that despite the cold outside, there is life and warmth within. Imagine the sharp prick of a holly leaf against your finger as you arrange a bow on the mantelpiece. The vibrant red of the berries glows against the deep, glossy green in the firelight. The earthy, resinous scent of fresh-cut greenery fills the room. It is a smell that cleanses. In medieval times, people believed the scent of evergreens would literally scrub the air of winter sickness. You see the intricate twisting of ivy vines wrapped around a pillar in a candlelit church. The beauty is quiet, ancient, and alive. There is a legend that bridges the gap between the pagan oak and the Christian evergreen. It is the story of Saint Boniface. In the 8th century, Boniface was a missionary to the German tribes. The legend says he came upon a group of pagans worshipping a massive oak tree dedicated to the god Thor. To prove that their god had no power, Boniface took an axe and felled the giant oak. The people waited for lightning to strike him down, but the sky remained silent. Pointing to a small fir tree growing among the roots of the fallen oak, Boniface said, "This little tree, a young child of the forest, shall be your holy tree tonight. It is the wood of peace, for your houses are built of the fir. It is the sign of an endless life, for its leaves are ever green. See how it points upward to heaven." Among the greenery, one plant held a mystical power so strong it was initially banned by the church. High in the branches of the sleeping oak trees, something strange grows. It is not part of the tree, yet it lives upon it. It has no roots in the ground. It seems to float between heaven and earth. This is the mistletoe. To the Druids, the mistletoe was the most sacred plant of all, because it grew on the holy oak, but remained green when the oak lost its leaves. They believed it held the soul of the tree during the winter sleep. It was the life-essence of the god, suspended in the air. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder gives us a vivid description of the harvest ritual. He tells us that on the 6th day of the moon, the Druids would climb the tree clad in white robes. They would cut the mistletoe with a golden sickle, ensuring that it never touched the ground, for if it touched the earth, it would lose its power. It was caught in a white cloak held by others below. 2 white bulls were sacrificed in the process. The plant was known as all-heal, or omnia sanctantime. It was believed to cure poisons, grant fertility, and protect against dark magic. In Norse mythology, the mistletoe plays a tragic and pivotal role. It is central to the story of Baldur, the god of light and beauty. Baldur was beloved by all. His mother, the goddess Frigg, traveled through all the 9 worlds and made every living thing promise not to harm her son. She asked the fire, the water, the iron, the stones, and the beasts, but she overlooked the small, insignificant mistletoe bush growing east of Valhalla. Loki, the trickster, found this weakness. He fashioned a dart, or an arrow, out of the mistletoe wood. During a game where the gods were throwing objects at the invincible Baldur, Loki gave the mistletoe dart to Baldur's blind brother, Hodur, and guided his hand. The dart pierced Baldur, and the god of light fell dead. The death of Baldur was the beginning of the end, the first step toward Ragnarok. But in some versions of the legend, the story finds a resolution that leads to our modern custom. It is said that Frigg's tears over her dead son turned into the pearlescent white berries of the mistletoe. In her grief, and eventually her mercy, she decreed that the plant should no longer be a weapon of death, but a symbol of love. Anyone standing beneath it would receive not a blow, but a kiss. This is the deep root of the tradition. Kissing under the mistletoe was a way of declaring a truce. In the ancient forests, if enemies met under a tree bearing mistletoe, they were obliged to lay down their weapons and embrace. It was a zone of neutrality, a sanctuary of peace mandated by nature itself. Imagine the pearlescent, translucent white of a mistletoe berry, glowing softly like a tiny moon. You visualize the flash of a golden blade in the moonlight of an ancient grove. The soft rustle of oak leaves surrounds you. You feel the suspension of conflict, the sudden, heavy silence of a truce. A gentle touch of a kiss on the cheek under a doorframe becomes a powerful echo of an ancient peace treaty. Because of these strong pagan associations, the magic, the fertility, the druidic rites, the church was very suspicious of mistletoe. For centuries, it was forbidden to bring it into the church building itself. Holly and ivy were welcome, but mistletoe was left at the door, a little too wild, a little too magical for the altar. These plants brought the forest inside, but the spirit of the season also manifested in strange and wondrous characters. We have spoken of Odin, the wanderer, and the Roman gift-givers, but as the centuries turned, these figures began to merge. The terrifying aspects of the wild hunt softened. The chaotic inversions of Saturnalia were tamed into charity. The bridge between the ancient gift-bringers and the modern Santa Claus is built on the shoulders of Saint Nicholas of Myra. He was a Greek bishop living in the 4th century in what is now Turkey. He was famous not for riding through the sky, but for his secret generosity. The most famous story tells of him throwing bags of gold through an open window, or perhaps down a chimney to provide dowries for 3 poor sisters who were about to be sold into slavery. His feast day is December 6th. For centuries, this was the primary day for gift-giving in Europe. But as the Reformation questioned the worship of saints, the gift-giving was moved to the Christ child's birthday. Yet the figure of the old, bearded man persisted. He absorbed the fur-lined cloak of Odin. He took on the joy and the feasting of the Roman Saturnalia. In England, he became Father Christmas, a personification of the season itself, not a saint, but a jolly spirit of feasting, often depicted wearing green, not red, and crowned with holly. The Christmas spirit we speak of today is, effectively, a survival of the communal generosity of Saturnalia. It is the one time of year when the strict boundaries of property and wealth are allowed to soften. We see this in the tradition of wassailing. In the orchards of England, villagers would gather to sing to the apple trees, pouring cider on the roots to ensure a good harvest. But they would also go from house to house, singing and offering a drink from the wassail bowl. In exchange, the wealthy homeowners were expected to give them food, drink, or money. It was a polite, musical demand for sharing. The box in Boxing Day, celebrated on December 26th, comes from this same impulse. It originated from the alms boxes placed in churches where parishioners deposited coins for the poor. On St. Stephen's Day, these boxes were opened and the contents distributed. It was also the day when servants were given a Christmas box, a gift of money or goods from their masters, and allowed the day off to visit their own families. It is a direct echo of the masters serving the slaves during Saturnalia. The underlying human need remains constant. In the scarce, frozen months of winter, hoarding is death, sharing is life. The festivals were designed to ensure that the resources were circulated, that the hungry were fed, and that the community survived as a whole. The lighting of the Advent wreath, with its 4 candles marking the weeks of darkness, echoes the solstice fire rituals. We are still lighting fires to call back the sun. We are still bringing the green world inside to remind us that life continues. Imagine the clinking of coins dropping into a wooden box, a sound of small mercies accumulating. You smell the warm steam rising from a bowl of wassail, rich with roasted apples and spices. You hear the sound of a choir singing in harmony in the distance, their breath visible in the cold air. You feel the profound gratitude of a warm meal when the wind is howling outside. You see the golden glow of a lit window from a dark street, a beacon that says, "You are welcome here." The history is now told, the origins revealed. We see that the holiday is a tapestry woven from many threads. So we see that when we gather around a tree, light a candle, or share a meal in the depths of December, we are doing what humans have done for thousands of years. We are defying the dark. We are remembering the sun. The names of the gods may change, but the spirit of the season, the hope for the light's return remains eternal. I'm so glad you could join me to uncover these secrets. If you're still with me, let's drift deeper into the quiet corners of folklore where the oldest legends still sleep. The fire has burned down to a bed of glowing red embers, casting long and dancing shadows against the walls of our library. We have traveled through the grand timeline of history, from the stone circles of the ancients to the roaring banquets of the medieval hall, and finally to the quiet Victorian parlor. But now, as the night deepens and the world outside falls into a profound silence, we step away from the rigid lines of dates and battles. We move instead into the softer, hazier realm of folklore. Here, in the deep midwinter, the boundaries between the known world and the world of myth become thin. It is time to explore the entities that inhabit the long dark, the figures that our ancestors believed were walking through the snow while humanity slept. Our journey into the folklore of the winter dark begins in the frozen landscapes of Scandinavia. Here, the snow lies thick and heavy upon the pine forests, and the nights stretch on for nearly 20 hours. In this land of deep cold, there is a figure that has transformed over centuries, evolving from a creature of terrifying power into a beloved symbol of the hearth. This is the story of the Yule goat, or the Jolbakan. To understand the goat, we must look back to the very dawn of Norse mythology. Long before the reindeer became the symbol of winter travel, the skies were the domain of Thor, the god of thunder. His chariot was not pulled by horses, which might stumble in the rocky clouds, but by two mighty goats named Tangrisnir and Tangenjoster. These were not ordinary beasts. Legends told that they were the source of the thunder itself. Their hooves striking the firmament as they pulled the heavy chariot through the storm. They were symbols of raw, unbridled vitality, creatures that could traverse the most difficult terrain without faltering. In the ancient mind, the goat was a creature of stubborn endurance, a trait highly valued during the harsh Nordic winters when survival was a daily struggle. As the centuries turned and the old gods faded into the mists of memory, the image of the goat did not disappear. It merely changed its form. It came down from the thunderous skies and entered the snowy villages. In the Middle Ages and early modern period, this manifested in the tradition known as Julebakking. During the dark nights between Christmas and the New Year, groups of young men would wrap themselves in shaggy goatskins. They would fashion masks out of birch bark or wood, attaching horns to their heads to mimic the silhouette of the beast. They would walk from farm to farm, singing songs and demanding hospitality in a rowdy, chaotic procession. It was a way of releasing the pent-up energy of the winter confinement, a moment of wildness allowed in the heart of the orderly season. But time has a way of softening even the roughest edges of tradition. Slowly, the rowdy procession of men in goatskins gave way to a quieter, more symbolic presence. The Yule goat became the Halmbak, the straw goat. This transition is deeply rooted in the agricultural life of Scandinavia. The last sheaf of grain harvested in the autumn was believed to hold the spirit of the corn, the very essence of the harvest's life force. To preserve this spirit through the winter, the straw was not thrashed but was carefully woven into the shape of a goat. Imagine the hands of a farmer in the 18th century, working by candlelight. He takes the dry yellow stalks of wheat, which still smell of the summer sun and the dust of the field. With thick red ribbons, he binds the straw, bending it into the shape of a goat with curved horns. The texture is coarse and brittle. The sound of the straw rustling is dry and crisp, like the sound of boots on frozen snow. This straw goat was placed by the hearth, a guardian of the house, and a promise that the grain would grow again in the spring. In some traditions, the Yule goat was the bringer of gifts long before the figure of Santa Claus arrived from the south. The goat would carry a sack of presents on its back, a silent deliverer who rewarded the household for their hard work. It was a humble figure, born of the earth and the field, smelling of dry grass rather than magic dust. Today, the straw goat remains a central piece of Scandinavian decor. It stands silently under the Christmas tree, wrapped in its red ribbons, a quiet observer of the festivities. Yet, the ancient power of the goat still echoes in modern times. In the Swedish city of Gävle, a colossal version of the straw goat is built every year in the town square. It is a massive structure, towering over the people, a testament to the enduring love for this symbol. And though it often meets a fiery end, the rebuilding of the goat is a stubborn act of tradition, mirroring the resilience of the animal itself. The goat represents the vitality that survives under the snow. It is the connection to the Slavic god Vels, who was often depicted with horns and associated with the wealth of the earth. It is the spirit of the Romanian Capra dance, where the goat falls ill and is revived, symbolizing the death of the old year and the birth of the new. As you picture the Yule goat now, imagine the rough texture of the straw under your fingertips. Visualize the bright red ribbon contrasting with the golden yellow of the dried wheat. It stands perfectly still in the corner of a wooden room, the firelight flickering against its woven flank. It is a piece of the summer harvest, sleeping through the winter, waiting for the return of the sun. It is a humble, earthy presence, grounding us in the reality of the soil and the seed. Leaving the straw goat guarding the Scandinavian hearth, we travel south, crossing the frozen Baltic and moving into the high, jagged peaks of the Alps. Here, in the deep valleys of Austria and Bavaria, the winter is ruled by a different figure. The snow here is deep and blindingly white, covering the sharp rocks and the pitched roofs of the mountain chalets. In this stark landscape, the nights of the Epiphany belong to a mysterious goddess known as Frau Perchta. Perchta is often called the Bright One, a name that hints at her ancient origins as a goddess of light and vegetation. But in the folklore of the Alps, she is a figure of duality, much like the winter itself. Sometimes she appears as a woman of breathtaking beauty, dressed in white, like the fresh snow. Other times, she is an old crone, her face lined like the bark of an ancient pine tree, representing the decaying year. She roams the countryside during the 12 days of Christmas, traversing the difficult mountain passes with ease. Her domain is the domestic sphere, specifically the work of spinning wool. In the days before industrial machinery, spinning was the constant, rhythmic soundtrack of winter. The wool, sheared from the sheep in the autumn, had to be turned into yarn for clothing and blankets. It was a slow, repetitive task. The spinning wheel would whir in the corner of the room, a hypnotic hum that accompanied the long evenings. The wool itself was soft and greasy with lanolin, passing through the fingers of the spinner to become a tight, strong thread. Frau Perchta was the guardian of this work. She expected the spinning to be finished by the 12th night. If she looked through the window and saw a distaff still full of unspun wool, she would be displeased. But if she saw that the work was done, she would leave a silver coin in a shoe or a bucket. This legend served a vital purpose. It ensured that the work was completed, but it also enforced a mandatory period of rest. Once the spinning was done, the wheel was to be stilled. No work was allowed on her feast day. It was a divine command to stop, to rest, and to recover. There is a visceral quality to the legends of Perchta. She was said to inspect the cleanliness of the house and the behavior of the children. She was the guardian of the beasts and the souls of the unbaptized, leading a wild procession through the sky. But for the listener seeking sleep, we focus on her role as the enforcer of the winter meal. On her feast day, tradition demanded a specific meal be eaten: fish and gruel, or oatmeal. Picture a heavy wooden bowl filled with steaming oatmeal. The steam rises in the cold air of the kitchen, carrying the scent of cooked grain. It is a simple, hearty meal meant to sustain the body against the bitter cold outside. Perchta was said to check the bellies of the children to ensure they had been fed this specific meal, while the older legends speak of her cutting open the stomachs of those who ate the wrong food. We can interpret this through a softer lens today. It was a ritual of purging the rich, heavy foods of the feast and returning to the simple, nourishing grains of the earth. It was a reset, a cleansing of the body to prepare for the coming spring. In the alpine villages, her presence is still celebrated with the Perchten processions. Men dress in terrifying wooden masks, carved with multiple horns and tusks. They wear heavy sheepskins and carry cowbells that clang with a deep, resonant rhythm. They march through the snow, making a deafening noise. But this noise is not meant to frighten the people. It is meant to frighten the winter. It is a sonic battle against the dark spirits of the cold, a way to wake up the earth sleeping beneath the frost. Imagine you are safe inside a warm cabin in the Alps. Outside, the wind howls around the eaves, but inside, the fire is steady. You hear the distant, rhythmic clanging of the cowbells as the procession passes through the valley below. It is a heavy, lulling sound. In the corner of the room, the spinning wheel stands silent and empty, the work finished for the year. A silver coin glints in the moonlight on the windowsill. Frau Perchta has passed by, and she has found everything in order. The house is clean, the wool is spun, and the simple porridge has been eaten. There is nothing left to do but sleep. We leave the high peaks of the Alps now and travel west, across the continent and over the sea to the rugged, rain-swept hills of Wales. The winter here is different. It is wet and misty, with fog clinging to the green valleys and the slate-gray rocks. In this ancient Celtic land, the folklore of winter takes on a haunting, poetic quality. As the new year approaches, the villagers of Wales might hear a strange sound at their door, the singing of rhymes and the snapping of a wooden jaw. This is the arrival of the Mari Elwyd. The Mari Elwyd, or the Grey Mare, is one of the most striking images in British folklore. It consists of a horse's skull mounted on a pole. The skull is stripped clean, an ivory white object that seems to glow in the darkness. In the eye sockets, pieces of green glass or baubles are placed, catching the light of the lanterns. The person carrying the pole is hidden beneath a white sheet, transforming them into a ghostly, spectral figure. But this creature is not left bare. The skull is decorated with colorful ribbons, red, blue, yellow, that flutter in the wind, and bells are attached to the bridle, jingling with every movement. This skeletal horse does not travel alone. It is accompanied by a group of men, often dressed in costume, who act as the leaders and the jesters. They travel through the village in the deepest dark of the night, arriving at a house and singing a verse in Welsh. This is the beginning of the asterisk, PWN, co-asterisk, a ritual battle of wits and rhymes. The people inside the house must sing a verse back, refusing entry with a clever excuse. The Mari Elwyd sings again, countering the excuse. Back and forth the verses go, a poetic duel fought through the thick wood of the door. The voices are muffled by the barrier, mingling with the wind and the rain. It is a tradition that celebrates the power of language and wit, a mental exercise to keep the mind sharp during the lethargic winter months. The snapping of the horse's jaw, operated by the carrier using a wooden lever, provides a percussive beat to the song. Eventually, the people inside must run out of excuses or simply decide to yield. The door is unlatched, and the Mari Elwyd is invited inside. This is the moment of transformation. The ghostly figure, which seemed so eerie out in the dark, becomes a bringer of luck. Her entry ensures good fortune for the household in the coming year. The group is given food and drink, usually warm ale and cakes, and the house fills with laughter and music. The origins of the Mari Elwyd are lost to the deep past. Some scholars connect it to the ancient worship of Epona, the horse goddess. Others see a linguistic connection between Mari Elwyd and Holy Mary, a blending of pagan imagery with Christian naming. But at its core, it is a celebration of life returning to the dead. The skull, a symbol of death, is decorated with the ribbons of a festival. It is animated, given a voice, and invited to the feast. It is a reminder that even in the depth of winter, when the world seems skeletal and bare, there is still life, humor, and warmth to be found. Picture the scene in a Welsh valley. The rain is tapping gently against the window pane. The fire is crackling in the grate. Outside, you see the pale shape of the horse's head bobbing in the darkness, the ribbons streaming like water. You hear the deep, melodious voices singing the ancient verses. You smile, thinking of a rhyme to answer them with. The door opens, and a gust of cold air rushes in, followed by the laughter of friends and the jingle of bells. The Grey Mare has arrived, and the winter night is no longer lonely. From the specific traditions of the village, we now move to a figure that is less about ritual and more about the environment itself. We travel to the stone cathedrals and ancient parish churches that dot the landscape of Britain and Europe. If you look closely at the architecture up at the roof bosses, or carved into the capitals of the columns, you will often find a face staring back at you. It is a human face, but it is transforming. Leaves sprout from the mouth, vines encircle the eyes, and branches form the beard. This is the Green Man. The Green Man is a paradox. He is a pagan symbol of nature's raw power, yet he resides comfortably within the holiest of Christian sanctuaries. He represents the unstoppable force of life, the vegetation that returns to swallow the stone if it is left untended. In the context of winter, the green man is the sleeper. He is the archetype of the vegetation god who dies or hibernates in the winter to be reborn in the spring. His story is echoed in the medieval poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight a tale set during Christmas time. In the story, a gigantic green warrior rides into King Arthur's court, holding a holly bow in one hand and an axe in the other. He challenges the knights to a game of beheading. It is a gruesome image, but symbolically, it is about the pruning of the tree. The Green Knight survives the blow, picking up his head and riding away, just as nature survives the cutting frost of winter. The green man is the sap that has retreated deep into the roots of the oak and the ash. He is the moss that remains green even when the snow covers the ground. When we bring evergreens into our homes, the holly, the ivy, the fir tree, we are, in a sense, inviting the green man inside. We are creating a small pocket of eternal summer within our walls to remind us that the gray world outside is only temporary. Imagine walking through an ancient stone church in the dead of winter. The air inside is cold and still, smelling of old incense and damp stone. Your breath mists in the air. You look up at a stone archway, and there, carved centuries ago by an unknown mason, is the face of the green man. His expression is calm, enigmatic. Oak leaves tumble from his lips. He is a reminder that the stone is dead, but the wood is alive. He is the wildness that cannot be fully tamed, the force that waits patiently beneath the ice. He is related to the Holly King, the ruler of the waning year, who battles the Oak King at the solstice. He is a fragment of Pan, the god of the wild places, but in the quiet of the church, he is simply a watcher. He represents the promise that the green will return. The buds are already formed on the trees, wrapped tight in protective scales, waiting for his signal. The green man sleeps, but he does not die. He dreams of the sunlight, and his dream keeps the forest alive. And finally, we leave the realm of personified myths, the goats, the goddesses, the horses, and the forest spirit sand. We turn our attention to the event itself. We look up, past the rooftops and the tree branches, to the sky above. We have arrived at the silence of the solstice. The word solstice comes from the Latin solstitium which means the sun stands still. For a few days in late December, the sun appears to rise and set at the same point on the horizon, pausing in its journey before beginning the slow march back towards the north. It is a moment of cosmic hesitation, a breathless pause in the clockwork of the solar system. This astronomical event creates a profound stillness on the Earth. The physics of our planet's axial tilt, leaning 23.5 degrees away from our star, plunges the northern hemisphere into shadow. But this shadow is not empty. It is a time of distinct atmospheric beauty. The cold air, free of humidity, turns the sky a deep crystalline blue during the twilight hours. At night, the stars shine with a hard, diamond-like brilliance. The constellation of Orion the Hunter strides across the southern sky, his belt of 3 stars gleaming brightly. Sirius, the dog star, flickers with blue and violet light in the cold air. In the natural world, the solstice is a time of suspended animation. The bears have retreated into their dens, their heart rates slowing to a fraction of their normal beat. The dormice are curled into tight balls in their nests of woven grass, deep beneath the hedgerows. The sap of the trees has flowed down into the roots, protected by the insulating earth. Even the seeds of the wildflowers are sleeping, their genetic code locked in a state of dormancy, waiting for the trigger of warmth, humans, to feel this pull towards rest. Before the invention of electric light, the long nights forced a change in our rhythm. We slept longer, we moved slower. The darkness was not something to be fought, but something to be inhabited. It was a time for the body to repair itself, for the mind to drift into the landscape of dreams. Think of the silence of a heavy snowfall. The flakes fall softly, millions of them, stacking up on the branches of the pines and the roofs of the houses. The snow absorbs sound, creating a muffled acoustic blanket over the world. The sharp noises of the day are dampened. The world feels smaller, more intimate. Stand in your mind in the center of a snowy field on the night of the solstice. The air is perfectly still. There is no wind to rattle the bare branches. The moon casts a pale silver light across the drifts, making the snow sparkle like crushed diamonds. The only sound is the slow, rhythmic intake of your own breath. You are witnessing the turning point of the year. The darkest moment has arrived, which means that from this second forward, the light will return. It is a moment of perfect balance. The past year is gone, absorbed into the history we have just explored. The new year has not yet begun. You exist in the space between, a timeless interval of peace. The Yule goat is sleeping by the hearth. Frau Perchta has finished her spinning. The Mari Elwyd has found her welcome. The green man is dreaming in the oak, and the sun is standing still. We have traced the path from the fires of the ancients to the quiet traditions of the hearth. The facts and the dates now fade into the background, leaving only the feeling of the Sizona time of rest, of waiting, and of peaceful dreaming. As the book of history gently closes, we move into a space of pure winter stillness. The night is long, the blanket is warm, and the world is at peace. Sleep well. We have journeyed through the annals of history, and we have walked among the legends of the hearth. Now the stories are finished. The dates and the names have dissolved into the quiet air of the room. There is nothing left to learn tonight, nothing left to memorize or understand. There is only the feeling of the season, the heavy, comforting blanket of the winter dark. In this final space, we will simply drift. We will float across the great, frozen landscapes of the world, visiting the realms of the ancient winter gods. But we do not visit them to hear their tales. We visit them to share in their stillness. We go to rest in their domains, where the cold is a protector and the silence is a song. Close your eyes and let the imagery wash over you, slow and steady, like the falling snow. Our mind's eye opens first on a landscape of ancient, weathered stone and sweeping mist. We are in the highlands of Scotland, the domain of the Cailleach. She is the Cailleach Burr, the divine hag of the winter. But here, in the deep quiet of the glen, she is not a figure of fear. She is the guardian of the rest. The land here is vast and open, composed of granite and heather, rising up into rounded peaks that touch the gray underbelly of the clouds. Imagine the mist rolling slowly through the valley floor. It is a soft, cool gray, clinging to the damp earth. It moves with a lethargic, liquid grace, obscuring the edges of the world, softening the sharp lines of the rocks. Everything here is damp and cool. The air smells of wet stone, of dormant peat, and the clean, sharp scent of snow that is waiting in the sky. The Cailleach walks these hills with a slow, heavy tread. She herds the deer, the red stags with their great antlers, guiding them down from the high, exposed ridges to the shelter of the lower glens. Picture a stag standing perfectly still in the mist, his breath pluming in the cold air, his dark eyes watching the world with a calm detachment. He knows the winter is here, and he accepts it. He rests in the tall, brown bracken, his body warm against the cold ground. In the distance, you can hear the faint, rhythmic sound of water. This is the Cailleach washing her great plaid in the Corryvreckan whirlpool. It is not a violent roar, but a deep, hypnotic churning. Swish and turn, swish and turn. As she washes the wool, the white foam rises and drifts across the land, becoming the snow. It falls gently, flake by large flake, covering the brown heather in a quilt of pristine white. This snow is not meant to kill the land. It is a blanket. It is an insulator. Underneath the white layer, the heather and the moss are kept safe from the biting wind. The Cailleach shapes the mountains with her hammer, but her strikes are slow, geological in their pace. She is sculpting the land for sleep. She turns her skin to stone, becoming one with the quartz and the granite. A silent sentinel, watching over the slumbering earth. Feel the stillness of the glen seep into your bones. The wind here is not a howl. It is a whisper, moving through the stiff, dry grasses. The lochs are dark mirrors, reflecting the gray sky. The water is still, perhaps touched by a thin film of ice near the reeds at the edge. A single snowflake lands on the black surface of the water and dissolves instantly. Another follows, then another. The rhythm is endless and soothing. You are wrapped in the Cailleach's heavy wool plaid, a fabric as thick and warm as the peat itself. It protects you. It holds you. You are safe in the gray, misty silence of the high hills, watching the world turn to stone and sleep. The mist thickens, and when it clears, the gray stone has vanished. We have drifted east, carried by the high currents of the air, crossing the sea and the plains until we reach the vast, endless forests of the Slavic lands. This is the realm of dead Moros, Grandfather Frost. The scale of this place is impossible to grasp. A forest that stretches for thousands of miles, a sea of birch and pine covered in deep, glittering frost. Here, the air is sharper. It is crisp and dry, biting at the nose and cheeks with a clean, invigorating cold. But you do not feel cold. You are warm, wrapped in furs, sitting in a sleigh that glides effortlessly over the packed snow. The sleigh is pulled by a troika, 3 magnificent horses harnessed abreast. They move in perfect unison, their breaths steaming in rhythm. But they make no sound. Their hooves strike the snow with a soft, muffled thud, a sound that is instantly absorbed by the trees. The only sound is the chiming of silver bells attached to the harness. They are tiny bells, and their sound is delicate, like falling glass. Asterisk, ting, ting, ting. Asterisk, the sound ripples through the silent taiga, fading into the endless rows of white trunks. Dead Moros drives the sleigh. He is a towering figure, wearing a long coat of deep midnight blue, embroidered with silver stars that seem to glow with their own light. His beard is like a frozen waterfall, white and flowing. In his hand he holds a crystal staff. As the sleigh passes a river, he touches the water with the staff. The water does not splash. It simply stops. It solidifies into a smooth, clear road of ice, perfect and silent. He is not freezing the world to harm it. He is building bridges of ice, connecting the isolated parts of the forest, creating a stillness that holds everything in suspension. Look up at the trees. The birch trees are like skeletal fingers dipped in sugar. Every branch, every twig is coated in a thick layer of hoarfrost. Against the deep blue of the twilight sky, they look like lace, high in the pine boughs. The birds are sleeping. They are fluffed up into round balls of feathers, their heads tucked under their wings. They are safe in the arms of the grandfather. The snow here falls differently. It does not clump. It falls as individual, perfect crystals, tiny stars that sparkle in the starlight. They land on your sleeve, and you can see the intricate geometry of the ice. The silence of the taiga is heavy and profound. It is a silence that presses against your ears, blocking out all the noise of the past and the future. There is only this moment, the gliding sleigh, the white trees, the blue coat, and the silver bells. The sleigh moves on, deeper into the forest, until the trees blur into a wall of white. The bells fade. We drift again, rising up and moving south, crossing the great plains until the land begins to crumple and rise. We are approaching the high, jagged peaks of the Balkans and Greece. We are entering the domain of Boreas, the god of the north wind. This is a different kind of winter. It is not the damp gray of the highlands or the deep forest snow of Russia. This is a winter of light and crystal. The air here is thin and incredibly clear. We are in Thrace, the mythical home of the wind, high in the mountains, where the rock meets the sky. Boreas is not a stormy gale tonight. He is a current of pure, cold air. Imagine him with great wings of dusky purple, the color of the mountains at twilight. He glides over the peaks, his breath chilling the air, stripping away the haze and the humidity until the world is rendered in high definition. The light here is sharp. The sun reflects off the snowfields with a blinding brilliance, and when the sun sets, the shadows are sharp and blue. Below us, the olive groves stand resilient in the cold. Their leaves are silver green, coated in a thin layer of frost that melts as soon as the sun touches it. The earth goddess, Demeter, is sorrowing, and in her sorrow, the land sleeps. But it is a beautiful sleep. The rocky slopes are bare and clean. The marble columns of ancient temples stand in the snow, their white stone cold to the touch, enduring the centuries without complaint. Boreas brings a clarity to the mind. The cold wind blows through the cluttered thoughts, sweeping them away like dry leaves. Listen to the sound of the wind in the high passes. It is a high, thin whistle, a continuous note that vibrates through the rocks. Asterisk, whoosh, whoosh. Asterisk, it is the breath of the planet. Far below, the sea churns against the cliffs. In the winter, the Aegean Sea turns a deep, dark blue, almost black. The waves crash rhythmically, a slow, steady drumbeat that echoes up the mountainside. The foam is white and heavy. But up here, in the realm of Boreas, we are above the sea. We are floating on the purple wings of the wind, drifting over the snowy peaks of Mount Olympus. The air is so pure, it feels like drinking ice water. It cleanses, it clarifies, it numbs the worries of the world, freezing them into stillness. The wind slows, the purple wings fold. We descend gently, drifting north again, crossing the continent to the land of the fjords and the glaciers. We are in the realm of the Norse giants. We are at Thrymheim, the thunder home, the abode of Skadi. Skadi is the giantess of the ski and the bow. She loves the mountains above all else. She rejects the noise of the ocean and the clamor of the gods' halls. She chooses the silence of the high peaks. We find her here, in a landscape of immense, overpowering white. The mountains here are sharp and jagged, tearing at the sky. They are covered in glaciers, rivers of ice that move so slowly they seem frozen in time. The only sound is the asterisk she asterisk of wooden skis gliding over powder snow. Scatty moves effortlessly across the drifts. She is a part of this landscape. She wears furs of white wolf and bear, blending into the snow. She stops on a ridge and looks out over the world. Below her, the fjords are black ribbons of water, cutting through the white land. Above her, the sky is a canvas of dancing light. The aurora borealis, the northern lights, are active tonight. Great curtains of green and violet light hang in the sky, shimmering and waving as if blown by a silent wind. They cast a strange, ethereal glow on the snow, turning the white drifts into shades of emerald and amethyst. The light moves, but it makes no sound. It is a silent symphony, playing for an audience of one. Scatty is not alone, but her companions are silent too. The wolves of the winter pack follow her, their paws broad to stay on top of the crust. They do not howl. They trot silently, their breath misting, their yellow eyes watching the dark tree line. There is a sense of profound isolation here, but it is not lonely. It is the peace of solitude. It is the relief of being away from all voices, all demands, all expectations. Imagine standing on that ridge next to Scatty. The air is so cold, it instantly freezes the moisture in your nose. The silence is so deep, you can hear the blood rushing in your ears. You are a tiny speck in a world of ice and rock and light. The glacier below creates a massive, towering silence, a presence that commands respect. There is nothing to do here but breathe, in and out. The cold air fills you, and the silence empties you. You are as still as the frozen waterfall in the distance, suspended in a moment of perfect, icy peace. And now the figures of the gods begin to fade. The Cailleach with her hammer, dead Moros in his sleigh, Boreas on the wind, and Scatty on her skis, they all drift away, dissolving back into the mist and the snow. We are left with something older and deeper than myth. We are left with the essence of the winter itself. We are left with the long sleep of the earth. Let your mind sink down, sink past the snow, past the crust of the frost, past the frozen mud, sink down into the dark, rich soil of the earth. Here, in the underground, it is not cold, it is cool and damp and stable. This is where the life of the world has retreated. Think of the roots of the great oak trees. They are vast, tangled networks, spreading deep into the dark. The sap inside them has slowed down, moving with a sluggish, sleepy rhythm. It is not dead, it is conserving its energy. It is resting. The tree knows that it does not need to grow right now. It does not need to produce leaves or acorns. It only needs to be. Think of the seeds lying in the dark. They are tiny capsules of potential, curled tight, sleeping in the soil. They are dreaming of the sun, but they are not impatient. They know that the time for waking is months away. For now, the darkness is their nurse. The darkness holds them, protects them, keeps them safe from the harsh world above. The snow that covers the surface is a blanket. We often think of snow as cold, but to the earth it is warm. It traps the heat of the ground, creating a cozy, insulated layer where the small animals can sleep. The dormouse, the bear, the badger, they are all curled up in their burrows. their heartbeats slow and steady. Asterisk, thump, thump, thump. Asterisk, this is the heartbeat of the winter. It is a slow pulse, a rhythm of deep hibernation. The earth is recharging. It is gathering its strength. There is no hurry in the natural world. The sun does not rush to rise. The flower does not rush to bloom. Everything happens in its own time. You are part of this earth. You, too, have a season of rest. The darkness of the night is your blanket. The quiet of the room is your burrow. Your thoughts, which have raced around all day like summer insects, can now settle. They can sink down into the roots, moving slow and deep. You do not need to grow right now. You do not need to achieve. You only need to rest. Feel the gravity of the earth pulling you down, gently holding you against the bed. It is a heavy, comforting pull. It is the same gravity that holds the mountains in place, the same force that keeps the oceans in their beds. You are anchored. You are safe. The wheel of the year has turned to its lowest point. The momentum has stopped. We are hanging in the balance, in the velvet void of the solstice. The past is a dream, and the future is a distant shore. There is only the soft, dark now. Visualize the snow falling above you, miles and miles of it, covering the continents in silence. It muffles the cities and the roads. It quiets the machinery of the world. Underneath, in the warm dark, you are drifting. The fire has burned down to glowing embers in the hearth. The light is a soft, pulsing red, fading to black. The forest outside is silent, wrapped in its blanket of white. The sun will return, as it always does. The green shoots will rise again, but not yet. For now, the night is here to hold you. Rest in the knowledge that you are safe. Rest in the knowledge that the wheel turns on its own without your help. There is nothing left for you to do but drift. Drift into the mist of the highlands. Drift into the white birch forest. Drift into the silence of the glacier. Drift into the warm, dark earth. Thank you for listening, sleeping scribe. The pen is laid down, the book is closed, the candle is extinguished.